All right, Doug, welcome back. We're at episode 11. I think that the appropriate title for this episode should be Peak Bear. Uh, like, I have never
Something.
seen or heard so much bearishness in the market. Is the kind of bearishness where people are not, there's a combination of people are like, crapping on crypto, but I think they're in equal parts. There's also people that are just not interested anymore. Are you getting
hmm
that sort of sense as well? Like people are just like, they just don't even want to talk about it anymore. They're just so done.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely. I'm trying to do math in my head. It's been what's it going on 14 months since we hit like peak capitulation, like 65K Bitcoin, etc. Like before Solana, all the FTX, three arrows blew up. But yeah, I would definitely say going into December, stuff was kind of again, let's call it like a 7.5, 8 out of 10. But to your point, I think we're definitely like at a good nine right now because yeah, I had personal stuff last night, but before this we were talking. He said, it was a handful of people at the meetup
Yeah.
where 12 months ago, I mean, we were stealing three or four benches. We had 20 people coming out, and I don't blame people too. I think we talk about this. One thing I do like about our group right now, we got the 10, 12 core people that are, obviously there's everyone's in this for their own personal reasons. Obviously, part of that's financial interest, but also too, it's like a lot of people, whether it's political, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe they come from a like humanitarian standpoint. We got people in tech, et cetera. Everyone has their own little interest in it, but the core 12 people we got, they're in it for the long haul.
Mm.
And I think it's good though too. It's, we talked about this a while ago. Obviously, peak bear can get a little, for lack of a better word, just depressing, just because it's like the same thing day and like how long we've been at 20K, etc. But I also think it's good too because you get rid of all the white noise. And I know we've talked about this, and it's a little bit fooey pie in the sky, but not even like us with the Austin people, but the Greg Fosses of the world and the Lynn Aldens and the people on the Twitter spaces and the YouTubes of the world that are still like, hey, I'm not telling people what to do, but we're still into Bitcoin. We're diversifying into our, other stuff. We're still long on this stuff. 24 months, 36 months from now, God forbid, Bitcoin finally breaks, six figures. We're going to look back and be like, oh, these were the people. Because, back in the 2014s and stuff, we had the Charlie Schrems and the Eric Voorhees of the world. And all that stuff blew up in New York, and people are like, "Oh, Bitcoin's dead." Well, you look to the 2017 bull market where we hit 20K. Those people that are around in 2014 that are, and like we said, all the white noise disappeared. That built the 2017 bull market, and et cetera, going into this one. But it does suck, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and not just the price as well. But have you been following any of this whole Silvergate bank stuff at all? Do you know much about what's going on there?
Yeah, I've been keeping tabs on that. I was kind of curious your opinion because it's kind of like a good segue into that where I have two schools of thought. So I don't know if you want your opinion
No, go
first or
ahead.
kind of or
What are your thoughts?
so, well, I guess we had a good segue. It's I was kind of joking with you the other day that like one thing I've joked about this too. If you want to learn like screw any Harvard 4 year psychology course, you want to learn like human just behavior, just get in like a crypto market for 12 months, put like 10K of your own money, and you will just like see even just how animalistic most people are when just even 2% price swings, etc. And another thing crypto's taught me, unfortunately, the elections about 9 months from now, the drums are going to be going off, and every day everyone's acting like the end of the world's happening. And one thing crypto's taught me too is, I forget who said it, but there's a good quote: if you're not talking about something within 90 days, it never really was news. Like for example, there's a lot of train derailments and stuff going on in
Mm.
America right now. I would bet half my crypto stack in 90 days, no one and their dogs talking about that. And I guess my segue with that is when I first was busy this week, but on work breaks and at the gym and stuff, I was kind of going on CoinDesk in between sets, and I was seeing the Silvergate thing, and I'm like, wow, man, this is kind of crazy. This like blew up, happened. It was big liquidity for the Coinbases of the world, a lot of the North America chains, and everyone's like, oh, this all sudden blow up, et cetera, et cetera. And I tell people I wouldn't say not like I'm not a smart person, but I'm like the cutoff for not being stupid. Within like 5-10 minutes of doing homework, we've talked about this, even blue chip companies like Apple and stuff, they've all had like 70% haircuts, in the last 18, 24 months. Silvergate, I could be wrong here, but I think that basically since, peak, crypto, capitulation going into end of 2021, their stocks like down 90%. So the fact that they've kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The last domino or pillar has fallen. It's like, well, your stock's been down 90%. FTX blow up. Like we've said, we're in peak, bear market. All the liquidity's dried up. So people are like, oh my God, I can't believe the Silvergate thing. The ship's taking on water. It's like, well, you've been out at sea for 18 months. Eventually you're going to sink or swim. So that was, at first, I was kind of nervous that maybe this was going to be another FTX type of scenario, but then just even doing a little bit of homework, I was like, oh, they've been taking on water for a while. So I think it was just, the Twitter echo chambers, people just start posting stuff. Everyone makes it a big deal. And at least from my short synopsis, I thought it's unfortunate that it fell. It does give the SECs and the DC monkeys more ammo to beat us with, but also thought that like I said, the last 18 months, it's just been nothing but straight down. Like I said, their stock, to my knowledge, was down 90%. So I think that was just the straw that broke the camel's back.
Silvergate basically was the major bank that did a lot of business with the crypto firms and exchanges. So Coinbase, Circle, Paxos, yeah, I think maybe Kraken as well. They would use Silvergate Bank, which, by the way, it wasn't a crypto bank back in the day. It started in the 90s at just a normal, regular bank. But then one of the CEOs came on as like, oh, we need to get into crypto. And this was before the bull run of 2021. And when that happened, they also went public and their stock went up. And it was one of the few banks that was connected to the Fed that had Fed supervision that was able to onboard all of these crypto firms and companies. And so it was a huge, boon for the, for the industry. A lot of people could onboard or offload their assets through the bank. And the reason that they are, I think it's fair to say that they're probably going to collapse. That's why the stock went down like 50% the other day, is because they were due to sort of release their, quarterly numbers about, how they're doing. And then they said, oh, you know what, we actually can't release them today. We need more time to assess our exposure to the market. And oh, by the way, we may not survive. They actually said that. In the announcement to delay their report, they're like, oh, we need to actually figure out if we're actually going to survive. And that resulted in a 50% drop in just one day. That's why it was such big news over the last several days. So the reason it's important is that it's one of the few banks, there's not the only bank, but it's one of the few banks that was doing business with a lot of these entities like Coinbase and Circle, Paxos, and what have you. And the reason that they're collapsing is only because they had a huge loan out to FTX. That's it. There's no other reason, right? They lent them a lot of money, and we all know how that happened. That happened 4 or 5 months ago, and I think they are starting to ingest the consequences of the fact that that money is probably gone, or they may not see that in years, and maybe they were over leveraged in some other way. I have no idea if they also got into other sort of murky business, who knows? But all of this has sort of cast a shadow on the crypto market in the sense that people think, well, if we have a bank exposed to the crypto industry and the bank collapses, then why the hell would, any other bank do business with crypto again? So I think this was sort of the mainstream media narrative that, if you're a bank and you do business with crypto, this is what happens to you, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, where a lot of the FUD was coming from. But there's two important things that I think the media is not paying a lot of attention to or highlighting. And one of them is that there were so few banks that were actually doing business with crypto companies that whatever risk there was in crypto was going to, by default, be concentrated in those banks because the risk was not diffused. If, for example, FTX got the same amount of money, but it actually got it from 20 banks or 10 banks or 5 banks, then that risk would have been spread throughout the banks and would have been more easy to absorb. But because Silvergate was literally the only one who was actually doing business with the crypto industries, it's whenever there's a collapse because of over leveraged conditions, then they are going to be disproportionately affected because they were the only ones who were willing to do business. So I think that's a thing. And the other thing that I think the media is not necessarily talking about is, long before Silvergate announced that, hey, we may not actually survive, the likes of Coinbase and Paxos and all of these other Circle as well. When FTX collapsed, I think they all did an inventory of where's our exposure. And I think a lot of them realized that, we better get away from Silvergate, take our money off. And, since FTX collapsed to about now, a lot of money has left Silvergate. A lot of the Coinbases of the world and whatever did it, like we want our money back. So I think the contagion is contained to Silvergate. I don't think like it's going to spill over and now Gemini is going to go bankrupt because Silvergate went bankrupt, or Coinbase is going to go bankrupt. Nothing. In fact, when Silvergate went down 50%, a lot of these companies like Circle and Coinbase immediately released statements saying, "Hey, we have no exposure. We are fine. It doesn't matter if they can collapse tomorrow. It doesn't affect us in any way." So, again, it comes down to like this regulatory frustration that the industry has is if, there was regulation, if there's regulatory clarity, then the likes of Bank of America, the likes of, JP Morgan, all these other banks would be happy to do business with cryptocurrency companies, and they would probably demand more due diligence because there's regulation now, and one of the regulatory frameworks is being adopted, not in this country but in other countries, but I assume it's eventually going to be adopted here as well, is that if you're a crypto exchange, you need to not rehypothecate your assets. Everything you say, the customers have in custody with you, you have to have 100% of that on your exchange. So if you had, for example, 10 exchanges here in the US that was working under regulatory supervision like that, then you wouldn't have the FTXs of the world setting up in the Bahamas where they could take advantage of regulatory arbitrage and, just sort of rehypothecate all their money and, create this entire giant Ponzi scheme without anybody really realizing it because, they were offshored. So, to some extent, this is the result of, the greed of, companies like FTX and the corruption and, illegal activities of someone like SBF. But I think it's fair to say that there's some blame to be shared by the regulators because they just sort of chased away all the good actors. They just made it impossible to do legit business in the U.S. And that resulted in these, these sort of scam people like SBFs is sort of offshoring and just, scamming everybody. So, to some extent, it's going to be a while before the stink, polishes off the crypto market. But I think, people think about it as, oh, here we go again, yet another crypto scandal, right? But it's really just part of the same set of dominoes that are collapsing, So it's unfortunate, and, it may take a few weeks before we see the tail end of this, but I don't know. I mean, did you have a sense of when, the clouds might lift from, peak bear, which is kind of where we're at right now?
It's a tough one, man, because I was even just thinking about this. A lot, everything you said, I agree with. I don't know if you ever seen like the Banking on Bitcoin documentary. It's on YouTube for free. Everyone listening should go watch it. Like it's when people ask me about Bitcoin, I send them that, and there's another one. The Rise and Rise of Bitcoin. It was kind of more amateur one, but the if you watch the Rise and Rise of Bitcoin, then Banking on Bitcoin, they go really well together. But in it, when there's the Charlie Shrems and Eric Voorhees of the world, and they had Bit Instant, basically the one of the crescendo points in the middle of the documentary was basically they were doing what they were doing in New York for 2 or 3 years, and then they met people in New York, and they knew 20, 30 people that were going to start their own companies, and then the Bit license came out by Benjamin, I'm blanking out right now, I believe it's Benjamin Losky, and basically it just said, hey, prove to us everyone you're not working with is a terrorist, money laundering, blah blah blah, and like they're successful companies, but they're not like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, who can have CPAs on retainer, and they're like, this is going to cost us 20 grand a month in lawyers, and we can't afford this. So basically they had to shut down overnight, and they were at the end of the film, they were like, New York City used to be the financial hub of the world. In 10, 20 years of this crypto stuff works, and like we said, maybe it moves to Dubai, maybe it moves to South America, maybe et cetera, Panama. Regulators might look back and be like, oh, we kind of effed up here because we've talked about this before, like whether it's the suits or just average Joes like us, people want to know what dance and what game they're playing, right? With that said, too, there's a fine line between everyone knowing what dance they're playing and then just excessive rules and regulation. And I guess to bring that back, could this be used as a sticking point for regulation to come? I don't know, because I think if again, not that it's not coming down the pipeline, it is in DC, but FTX was like, it was bigger than Bernie Madoff. That crap was huge, and like we said, like the contagion in that, it just seems, we're, like you said, 5 months removed, and it looks like Silvergate's hand got caught in the cookie jar with FTX, and here we are.
Mm.
But I guess your question of how much more bearish we have. One thing my grandfather always taught me in life is like, shit runs in threes. So like I was joking with one of my coworkers the other day. He was driving to work and some UT girl on her phone makeup text and hit him, and he's fine, thank God. But his car, a couple grand and cosmetic work most likely. But he was kind of grinning. He's like, oh, I'm nervous. He's like, why? He's like, shit runs in threes. Probably something else is gonna happen here soon. And the reason I bring that up is ever since the Silvergate thing the last week or so. Again, it's Twitter. You take it all with a grain of salt, but a lot of people are fudding that basically the last two dominoes to fall before we're maybe in pure bear, nothing but up from here, is Binance and Tether.
Mm.
And I kind of wanted your take on that. Do you? I guess first, not as much Binance, but what is your take on Tether? Because since I've entered the space in the middle of 2017, that has basically like been Dogecoin on steroids, with a lot of respectable people saying it's a Ponzi. And here we are, most likely within the next 12 months, going to start possibly going into the next bull market cycle, and it's still here. And there's people saying that was apparently had its hand in the cookie jar with FTX, but it's still kicking. So I guess to answer your question, I think we are pretty close to peak bearishness and as low as we can go. The one thing that still does amaze me, and I think a lot of people after the Silvergate thing, is how Tether is still kicking. So I kind of wanted your take on that, because I think, not even counting all macro stuff, inflation, CPI prints, what the Fed does with interest rates, etc., I still think internally the last domino we have to fall, in my opinion, before we get like pure scorched earth, is Tether. So what's your takes on that?
Whatever I'm going to say is not in defense of Tether. I don't have any, well-researched opinions on the project, but as you said, there's been so much FUD on Tether over the last several months, and I think the Wall Street Journal, or I think it was Wall Street Journal, came up with an article only about 3 or 4 days ago, and it was picked up by CNBC, and they did a whole breathless, pearl-clutching piece on the article. And the article basically was saying that Tether was involved in creating some sort of offshore accounts in order to be able to do banking, and it made it sound like what they had done was highly dubious, perhaps illegal, and that here we go again. Here's another scandal that's about to hit us like a ton of rocks. But the only the way that Tether is actually going to bring anything down is if they actually are not backed 1-to-1. Now I have no idea if I suspect that they are back to 1-to-1, because there's been just so much scrutiny on top of them for years that you would think the smart thing to do is to just make sure that they're back to 1-to-1, right? And I think they're also regulated by New York, which recently also, I think about a year and a half ago, made them go through some additional legal hoops. And again, I don't have details, but they've just been under the microscope for so long that if they're really not back to 1-to-1, I think it would have, with the bank run that we had, with FTX and all of the bearishness that we had last year, I would suspect that the worst of that whole bearish, drive of capital out of the market is over. And if they didn't collapse in such a bearish capital flight situation already, then it really makes me hard pressed to believe that the collapse is yet to come. The other thing I'll say about the Wall Street Journal article that came out against Tether just a few days ago was that banking irregularities that they were accused of doing occurred in 2018. So we're talking about something that happened 5 years ago. So it's like they kind of combed through whatever they could comb through. They found some dirt that happened in 2018. And, we have to remind ourselves, 2018 in crypto was literally the fucking Wild West. It was cowboys and Indians. Maybe there was a sheriff in some town, some settlement, and they just elected, it was Bob's turn to be the sheriff. That was kind of the regulatory landscape in 2018. There was like nothing going on, right? Like the SEC didn't even want to they had no idea what Bitcoin was. There, no one in Congress or the Senate ever talked about Bitcoin. It was such a it's this weird, crazy thing that these morons are doing over there on the side. So obviously things are much more different now, right? It's the president talks about it. It's the senators talk about it. SEC is definitely talking about it all the time. So there's a lot more scrutiny now. So anything they did in 2018, I'm like, whatever, right? I mean, who cares?
Yeah.
And more importantly, like whatever they did do, was it cooking the books? And I don't think the answer is yes. I think what they were accused of doing is like they couldn't get banking services because banks didn't want to do business with them. So they set up some false shell companies, and then they use the shell companies to be able to access banks so they could do business, right? Because there were just no regulatory like clarity out there. So a lot of banks that want to do business is just something we just finished talking about with Silvergate. And so they just went around those restrictions by just creating shell companies. Now, should they have done that? I'm not defending them. I have no idea. But that's far removed from, oh, they stole people's money and they killed someone's grandpa and they torture kids. And I mean, whatever, the kind of allegations the media like wants us to think is actually going on. I mean, they created some shell companies so they could get banking services. I mean, oh my God, like let's crucify them. And that too 5 years ago, right? So, I still don't, there's some smoke, but the smoke is like really old. Um, Again, I have no idea if they're going to collapse. But what I'm saying is that, when I read these news articles and I look for I read all this bearish stuff that's happening in crypto, the only lens that I look at it through is this a fundamental risk to cryptocurrency, this asset class, or not, right? Or is this yet another scandal that's going to blow over, and like 3 weeks later everyone will forget all about it, right? Remember, once upon a time it was a huge deal that China banned Bitcoin. Remember, like when it happened in 2019 or whenever it was that it happened.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say which time. I'm not even joking because
Yeah,
like long
yeah,
story
exactly.
short, like within the last year, I've had some buddies send me articles like China bans Bitcoin. What do you think? And I tell them, I said, I'm not being like, hyperbole here, or just like talking on my ass. Since I've been in the space, I've easily seen 100 articles. Like, and this isn't some Joe Smo. This is like what you said, Wall
Yeah.
Street Journal or Bloomberg. Oh, China bans Bitcoin. This is done dead over pet rock, and like I've literally seen that 100 times. It's to your point, it's like apparently that was like when people were like that's big news. I'm like, where the hell have y'all been? This is easy the 100th time I've seen this.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's so many stories that in the moment seem like, oh my God, this is like the end of crypto, and but we've talked about this on the podcast before. Is whenever this sort of news arises, and this is as true of mainstream news as it is of crypto news, the social media hype cycle, the social media engagement incentives will try to turn a mountain out of a molehill, because they're like, well, we have to like the more we like scream bloody fire and the sky is falling, the more clicks we're going to get. But you have to actually go through the details. I mean, we made a whole podcast where we went over the Kraken SEC settlement, and we sort of determined like it was like whatever, like who cares, they had created a product, and then and then they called it a staking product, and they were offering staking like yields, but they were probably doing some other things. And then the SEC says, well, like you can't do that, that was a security, which is probably true. And then but if you look on the if you look at the Twitter space, people are saying, well, the SEC is coming after staking, full stop. No, they were just coming after a product that Kraken created that had staking sort of custodial services built in, right? So I think the media gets very over, ahead of itself when it comes to creating panic, and that's sort of why when you have Silvergate, and then you had the Binance article, and there was also this Paxos article, and a few other things as well going on, everyone just like puts it all together, and since they don't really understand the space very well, they're like, all right, the world is falling, crypto is dead, yeah, again, Bitcoin is also dead again. And we were talking about this on the meetup yesterday. Rob was saying, yeah, this is exactly when people like tune out and they think, well, this is all gone. And then when Bitcoin is like triple the price where it is today, they're all calling you on the phone, like, hey, how should I buy Bitcoin now? I mean, this is the time to pay attention. This is the time to like educate yourself and like actually read what is really going on, and go into the details, and not go by the headlines that, oh, FTX did this, and Silvergate did that, and Kraken did this. You have to look at the headlines and ask yourself, is this an existential threat to crypto? No? Okay, then move on. That means that, crypto is still, kosher. So that's the way I think about it. I'm not particularly worried about like Tether, at the current moment. I mean, I don't think that hobby horse will ever die. When it comes to the mainstream, media, they'll just keep coming up with other sort of things. But you mentioned we were talking about China for a second, but have you also been following the whole Hong Kong, onboarding of crypto? Did you look into that yet?
No, I've not heard about that. What is that?
So, as you know, Hong Kong has sort of this special economic designation from the mainland China because they do a lot of these sort of experiments in Hong Kong first, and then if it works out, they might import it over to China. And the Chinese mainland, the Communist Party, have an office over there that they call the Chinese Liaison Office, or the China Liaison Office, or the Liaison Office, which is basically the set of people in Hong Kong that come from the Chinese Communist Party who are representing the CCP's interest in Hong Kong. And the Hong Kong government has announced over the last few weeks and months. There was actually rumors about this in October, but now it's official. They officially stated that they are going to start allowing retail people to buy cryptocurrency, and they're basically going to call the exchanges back in. They're going to like, okay, we want exchanges in Hong Kong. These are sort of the regulations that we want, and it was the regulations all are like super sensible. Like there's nothing like, oh, you gotta like give us your grandma's DNA. I mean, there's nothing. They were just like anti-money laundering. It's like we need to know who it is that's buying the stuff. I mean, just the same stuff that you would expect, cookie cutter regulations, nothing like out of the world. And they also said that we will allow trading of all of these different tokens, and they had certain criteria. They're like, if a token is listed on 2 crypto indices, then we will allow them. And that list includes something like 7 or 8 different cryptocurrencies. So basically everything in the top 10 these days is going to be traded in Hong Kong. And that is going to get going in July. So we're just talking about 3 months from now. Now, the reason I mentioned the liaison board is the question arises, well, okay, this is the Hong Kong government doing this, that's not the Chinese government because they're not exactly the same. The reason I bring that up is that the liaison board, the members of the liaison board are like regularly going to these crypto meetings where this is all being discussed, and the people over there, like, these guys are being super supportive. They have no objections. They're like very like open-minded. They in fact, not only that, but the liaison board has actually been in touch with several Chinese-based cryptocurrency projects, and I don't know how many. I think VeChain is one, and Nexos, and I forget like the exact Chinese projects, but the folks over there are actually supportive of cryptocurrency, it seems, right? And Bloomberg had an article about this, just a few days ago, that basically said the Chinese CCP government is quietly sort of supporting the crypto market in Hong Kong. And I think what they're doing is that they are allowing Hong Kong to sort of run this experiment, and they're going to see how well it works over there, and if it works over there, then they may import it in the next few years over to China when they feel like the market is mature enough. But I think one of the biggest thing it highlights is Hong Kong is a huge financial hub. It always has been. And now, finally what's happening is this major financial hub is opening itself up for business, for crypto. And London, by the way, is doing the same thing, right? And Dubai, of course, is already like up and running, right? And this is something that Brian Armstrong talked about is crypto companies are just moving elsewhere. Like, they've had enough with the FCC. And I think seeing this happen, I would at least hope that, politicians and regulators and government officials are looking at this and they're thinking, okay, we need to start really doubling down on getting some regulations on the books about what is allowed and what's not allowed, and, what you can do and what you can't do. And I'm really hoping that in the next 12 months, there'll be something on the books where people say, okay, crypto is kosher, these are the rules, go, right? And I know that Brian Armstrong is, like pushing, really hard for some sort of sensible regulation. He was on CNBC a few days ago, and this is one of the things he was saying about is Hong Kong is passing regulation, the EU, the UK, they're all passing regulations, and if we don't get our act together, we're going to be left behind. So I don't know, does that make you feel bullish at all? I mean, hidden in all of the bearish news out there is the fact that one of the major financial hubs of the world is going to effectively legalize crypto. and have cryptocurrency
Yeah, I
markets?
definitely same thing, like just macro pulling out. I think, same thing 24 months from now, God forbid, like I said, we crack, six-figure Bitcoin, etc. This could be something we look back and be like, oh, this was a catalyst to get us going. And I think it was last episode, I think we did that whole, US dollar versus China, like OPEC, etc. But same thing too, like, it's not a coincidence. Like, for example, a lot of the social medias have basically turned into TikTok. Why? Because they're like, oh man, everyone's on TikTok. We got to make our own reels, etc. I know we've joked about this too. Like a lot of the fat cat suits and stuff. A lot of people, we've talked about like the Kevin O'Leary's and Mark Cubans. They are smart dudes. They've done a lot. They're billionaires. But the longer I've been in this space, a lot of these, let's just call them one percenters. They're basically just copycats. If they're like, oh, Bobby's
Yeah.
business is doing this shit, he's taking our lunch money, and we were talking about this. It's kind of a little weird to think about like on paper, but the American dollar runs everything right now, for better or worse, just objective fact. But if whether it's London, Dubai, Hong Kong, Australia, China, like pick, God forbid, even North Korea, pick your poison. If they start like investing into crypto companies and start making infrastructure, and whether that's with Bitcoin or other stuff, rising tide lifts all ships. Well, America, like these monkeys in DC, end of the day, they're just like shit. We're just losing power. We're behind the eight ball too, and then also, like, how am I trying to word this? We're like basically, if they say their lunch money is getting taken, they're just going to panic and basically give it a stamp and go through. And then same thing too. It's if how do I word this? It's a weird double-edged sword. I do not like the stranglehold, the SEC, and like we've talked about this, that it's like rules for thee, not for me when it comes to New York fat cats of the world. Like we said, I would like them just to same thing. Everyone knows what sandbox we're playing in, what games they are. But if it comes, like I said, we're in the next bull market, and it's whether it's London, Hong Kong, Dubai. Like we've talked about this. The one beautiful thing about crypto, you got your private keys, you got your cold storage. That whether it's VeChain, whether it's Solana, whether it's Cardano or Bitcoin, that's the same Bitcoin you can use here. You can use in Hong Kong or Dubai. So I'm like you. I think no one knows their hand from their ass. I think, like you said, maybe what you said is June, July. It's coming out. It's hard to tell what could happen between now and then. I'm still like on that 10K bandwagon, but I think it's like we were talking about last week with the China US dollar thing. I think even though people want I guess was what I was trying to get back to earlier. I think even though people want the America to be the light tower for crypto, uh, in a sense that's a weird stranglehold for centralization where again, he's a hot, like a 50-50 with people, but Charles Hoskin talks about this, and I agree with this. 20 years from now, looking back, the main adoption is not going to happen in North America. Even though the banking system has a lot of problems, it works really well in North America compared to the rest of the world. I forget the running fact, like a billion people in the world, 2 billion adults have zero access to bank accounts. Like literally whatever sack of gold or rubies, whatever they have in their house, that's basically their bank. So 20, 30 years from now, the real crypto adoption looking back is going to take place in other parts of the world. And to your point, for South America, it's Panama. For East Asia Pacific, it's Hong Kong. So it's like you said. I think Brian Armstrong again. He's dividing force in the crypto community for better or worse. But he said it too. He's like, we're just getting sick and tired of this shit. And same thing with crypto. The double-edged sword of it, it's digital, you can move it anywhere. But like I said, I could totally see by the next bear market we look back and it's like most of the major adoptions happen in Europe and Asia, and the SEC in North America gets left behind. And like again, as an American, is that the best thing? No. But like we've talked about, this one beautiful thing with crypto, if you got your cold storage, that shit's good anywhere. So it's like back to my point on rising tide lifts all ships. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Do you have a sense of why it is that Brian Armstrong is, polarizing or controversial at all? What are your thoughts on him? Because you said he was a little bit polarizing. Why do you think that is?
I guess like kind of like taking a step back for a second, that banking on Bitcoin, he was one of the guys that was slightly interviewed in that documentary. And it's crazy too, like literally a decade ago he was like, I could be wrong about this, I might be talking on my ass. Yeah, I think he dropped out of Stanford or like finished early with like 2 credits left. But he was like a lot of crypto people, he's like, why am I going to college when like doing this thing when like I'm building the future company in my freaking dorm room? Like I might be butchering that a little bit, but they were talking to him about that. And same thing when Coinbase started, I believe it was just Litecoin, Bitcoin, and it might have been Bitcoin Cash back then, but it was basically like we're gonna call it blue chips. And even like in like we were saying, like 2018 was the Wild West, like Bobby and his dog were the freaking sheriff. Coinbase, like when I first got in, I think was like just Ethereum, Litecoin, Bcash, Bitcoin. EOS might have been on there, but anyway, but same thing was still pretty blue chips. And this is going to be a little hypocritical because I call myself like a wannabe libertarian, but the one thing that did disturb me this past bull market, I did make a Swan account to get some Bitcoin, but I still have my Coinbase account, and it was already active. So like, I'd have my DCA going, just buy stuff here and there. But it seems like every month when I would go in to get my DCA or whatever, I would look and I like gun to head, I could not tell you what one of those coins on there was. And one thing, and again, I get why they did this to a degree because like same thing for a lot of people. Litecoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin, they're kind of boomer coins. But when you would go on Coinbase, they would have the pay to learn thing. So you do like the 5 minute video and you would get paid and stuff. But like literally there was 20 or 30 coins, gun to head. I could not tell you what they were. And I get it. It's something new. Like everyone kind of knows what Bitcoin is, what Ethereum is, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people were like, they were not that they were shills, but it's like if you're going to pay people to get into the space, you should pay them to learn about the shit that's most likely still going to be here in 5 or 10 years. And I guess to a lot of people's point, a lot of the pay to learn stuff, it's basically all vaporware now. Like, the liquidity dried up and it's nowhere to be found. And a lot of the Bitcoin maxi, the hardcore plebs, if you go on the Twitter spaces, like the last 12 plus months, they've been talking shit on him and Coinbase and, I'm blanking on his name right now, but the guy of Bitcoin Swan, he Corey Klepson, there we go. Jacob's a big fan of him. He went on a roast one time about Brian Armstrong and saying, and again, I can't validate this, but it wouldn't surprise me that he's had just a lot of representatives in DC, and he's basically how do I word this? Back to the rules for the E, not for me thing. He's wanted a lot of regulation, but also it's like, oh well, we've already kind of been here for a while, so for all the new players coming in, this is what should be the guidelines. But for all the Coinbases, Krakens of the world who've been here, this shouldn't apply to us. And I can't validate that right now, but Jacobs told me that's been like Corey Klepson's criticism of him. And the one thing I will give Brian the benefit of the doubt. A lot of people that will criticize him or the Krakens of the world or the Jesse Powells, I go, please show me the roadmap. And then they'll go, what? I'm like, we're kind of building the plane while we're flying it right now. Like maybe Brian or Jesse Powell does something you don't like, call it out. But when people are like, oh, you're not building real crypto companies properly, or this isn't how we reach, hyper Bitcoinization or et cetera. And my reply would be, please show me how to do it. Like we're building the plane while we're flying it. So I think that's people's thing where it's, maybe for lack of a better word in 2017, 18, like we said, when stuff was more wild, wild west, he might've been more of a Bitcoin maxi or just like a blue chip person. And recently, like I said, Coinbase, you could say it's maybe turned into a shill where if you go on there gun to head, it's like, what the hell is half the stuff they're putting on there? But on the flip side of it, I feel like a lot of people, maybe even myself, who might criticize that, it's like, well, you're libertarian, you're the open markets fix themselves people. If they want to put Dogecoin, Shitpoint, come Rocket 2.0, they're a private business, they're allowed to do that. So it's, I know that was a lot there. I think it's just back to crypto markets, man. I think we want our abs and pizza. We want open markets, flip the legacy financial system. Bitcoin fixes everything. But on the same time, we also want to tell all these emerging companies how to actually hit crypto adoption. And back to my point, we're building the plane while we're flying it. So I think that just people's gripe with him is that they want their abs and pizza. And like I said, I think 20 years out, I think he's definitely going to be on the Mount Rushmore with like Charlie Shrem for crypto people. But I guess like to put a pin on it, it's like, like how, like God forbid, like you and I start a crypto company right now. Could you imagine just trying to do that right now? So it's, I think, like I said, in 20 years, he's going to be looked at on the Mount Rushmore. I just think some people think that if he is like an OG in crypto, I think maybe the last, like I said, 24, 36 months, they've promoted some of the shill, come rocket, sheep stuff, which, turned into vaporware. And I guess my point with that is when people first get into the space, if you buy Sheeb and Dogecoin, you put your only $1,000 you have into it, 4 months before, December and the market blew up. Well, if that's your first experience in crypto, like we said, right now we're telling people to buy. They're like, no, I lost my ass 18 months ago buying, Doge and Sheeb. And then like, we got to tell them like, okay, Sheeb and Doge are their own little thing. Cardano, well, you get my point. The Cardanos, the Ethereums, the Bitcoins of the world, they're in their own little bucket. So I think that's the thing. It's just like some people maybe got upset that they were promoting vaporware, which if new people buy that when they enter the space and they lose their ass, it kind of gives them PTSD and it's hard to get them going into the next bull market. So
Yeah, I do remember now. I'd forgotten about this when the whole Dogecoin phenomenon was happening, and was it 2020? I think it was. Um, when it was happening, I think it was Coinbase that said, okay, we're going to put Dogecoin on our exchange because, that's what people want, and, who are we to argue otherwise? And I
hmm
remember when they did that, I was feeling a little bit annoyed. I'm like, come on, guys. I mean, you're also enabling this behavior, and the sort of the fundamentals of Dogecoin are just garbage. It's an
yeah,
inflationary coin. If you want an inflationary token, just buy the US dollar, right? We have that already. And
yeah.
it's highly centralized. It's very easy to 51% attack. There's all of these problems with Dogecoin, but then when you have someone like Coinbase put their weight behind it, then it gives it a legitimacy that it really doesn't deserve. And let's be fair, it's really been pumped up by Elon Musk, who sort of just I mean, again, 2021 and maybe the tail end of 2020 was basically just like a cocaine-addled fever dream in the markets, not just in the crypto markets, but the traditional markets as well.
Well, I
Everything
mean,
was just
we had the COVID fund money, man. It was everything was up. Like I
yeah.
have some buddies who got into the trading card business, and that's blown up recently too. But I mean, some people think the ROI on Doge. I got some buddies of buddies that just bought some random Patrick Mahomes jersey card, and literally within 30 calendar days did like a 5x on it, which is like crazy. It was like everything, same thing. It was just helicopter money.
Yeah, I mean, I think in retrospect, if like someone like Brian Armstrong had come out in 2020, 2021, made a podcast of his own, or just sort of some sort of sat people down and says, listen, like this is all fun and games and this is all great, but let me explain Bitcoin and let me explain Dogecoin and explain what the differences are and why one is this vastly superior form of monetary network than the other, right? And you can go down the list of like, well, let's look at the code updates on Dogecoin. Well, there's no code updates because no one's actually doing anything on the thing.
Yeah, no devs. Yeah.
Let's remind ourselves that it took the people who created Dogecoin 4 hours of coding to create it. I don't know if you know that. It literally took them like a few hours to slap it together. They changed one line in the Bitcoin, base code, and suddenly, and they changed the icon, and they basically, it was just a goof. It was nothing at all. It was just a joke. And then the fact that it's inflationary, the fact that it sort of is co-mined with, I think it's Litecoin at the same time, the fact that a few people own like 97% of all the tokens. You put all these things together, and you have to. It would have been such a teachable moment during that time, right? Where, and I think Charles Hoskinson actually did do a video where he was like, "Listen, let's talk about the design properties of
Yeah.
Dogecoin, and this is why it's a problem." And when Elon Musk was hyping it up, that's when Charles put a video out and said, listen, if you want Dogecoin, that's fine. But, if you want to make Dogecoin better, then these are all the steps you have to go through. And he went through like 11 different changes that you have to make. And then he, I think, tongue in cheek says, oh, by the way, if you do changes, you're basically reinventing a Bitcoin, which was, I think was brilliant. I think he was one of the few, people who actually sat down and like actually went through point by point why this is just not a good idea, and then Elon Musk got his ego ruffled when people were in the Bitcoin community was pushing back. I remember it was Peter McCormick basically told him to go fuck himself or something. He
That sounds
and
like Peter.
yeah, he and Peter had a big sort of back and forth on Twitter. It was very public. And those were the days where like a lot of people were shitting on Elon for all sorts of other reasons as well. So I think I definitely take your point. Is I'm not. I think this was right before Coinbase went public. They went public during the whole yeah, parabolic run.
What was it? Was it like May of 21, right? So yeah, it would have been going into
Yeah,
that, right? It was
I'm
around
talking about
May
the
or April,
Dogecoin.
yeah.
Yeah, the Dogecoin phenomena was before they went public. And yeah, they could have used it as a teaching moment, but they didn't. And instead, they sort of said, okay, we're going to list it also. And Coinbase is such an old name in the industry that when they did that,
hmm
everybody and their mom is like, well, there you go. We have the stamp of legitimacy, because if Coinbase, the responsible crypto company is listing it, then it must be a legit project, and I should buy
hmm
it because it's going to go to $1, right? That was the whole meme of that time. People didn't really understand how market cap works, right? Uh, so I definitely take that point. I think that's a valid point, against Armstrong, because he sort of projects himself as like one of the most serious and people in crypto. If you're going to take anyone seriously, you should take him seriously. Um, I wonder though that if in the recent few months he's been stepping it up a little bit in a way that I think the industry should encourage. And what I mean by that is, before FTX, collapsed and SBF turned out to be just a ginormous vegan douchebag and fraud. He was looked at, SBF was looked at as the guy that, people, in Washington would call and ask about, regulation, and SBF
Yeah, he's the next
himself
Warren
was,
Buffett. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Warren Buffett was mentioned as well in some of these profiles as well. And he was having a lot of meetings with the regulators, and there was a lot of talk that he was pushing legislation forward that was ultimately abandoned because FTX collapsed. Right? It was all I think written out already, and it was not very favorable either. Then all that collapsed, and suddenly there was a sort of power vacuum, or at least a leadership vacuum in the crypto space. I'm like, okay, who speaks for us in Washington? Who is out there that's going to agitate on our behalf? And I think Brian Armstrong is sort of fitting into that role. And I think he has some legitimacy. The Dogecoin phenomena notwithstanding, he's had this company for 10 years. It has not been hit by any kind of scandal, like, they lost money or they were involved in this scam, and they didn't release their own token. Let's remember, they were one of the few exchanges that didn't release tokens, right? Binance released its own thing, and obviously FTX did its own thing, and Coinbase could have done that many, many times over in the last 10 years. They could have just released some shit coin, and they could have called it, the Coinbase coin, and, that would probably netted them billions of dollars. And they resisted doing that, right? They also became sort of the major custodial service for a lot of institutional buyers as well. They have hundreds of they have billions, actually, tens of billions of dollars of assets under management through their custodial service, because a lot of the institutions trust them to custody their money. So if anyone is going to, go to Washington and sort of advocate for the industry, it's going to be Brian Armstrong, right? He's sort of the poster child now, and he's really unmarred by any sort of significant scandal. Like, listing Dogecoin is like, of all of the heinous shit you could pull off in, the crypto world, that is like, the most forgivable thing that you could have done, right? And you could have even argued that, well, he would maybe had a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders for like going where the money is. At least he didn't like commit a bigger crime of like, minting an exchange token, like Binance did, right? So I think he's stepping it up. There's really nobody else. Like, Jesse Powell of Kraken can't say anything because he just settled with the SEC. So what, and he also sort of, resigned from Kraken like maybe 6 months ago. So he's no longer the head either. So there's really no like major person. I mean, Saylor is out there. But Saylor is basically just like, shitting on anything that isn't Bitcoin, right? Everything's a security except Bitcoin, and we should all shut it down. So I don't think people are really looking, toward to him for any kind of guidance on how we should legislate DeFi or like the NFT space or lending or anything at all, right? Saylor is just about Bitcoin, so it's not him. And obviously CZ is just like, persona non grata in Washington. I don't even know if he dares to come to the US anymore, right? Because he might get arrested for something. I don't even really know what's going on with him. So he's not it. And so it ultimately turns out to be that Brian Armstrong may be the one person who actually has a legitimate sort of persona that people can take seriously and legislators can actually listen to. Because all right, let's talk to someone who's not a toxic individual. Because you could argue for all of Saylor's, being a Bitcoin Jesus right now, he can be a bit toxic sometimes, right? He's a bit argumentative, and he basically just shits on everything, that isn't Bitcoin, including the US dollar, by the way, right? Which he practically considers a shitcoin at this point. So I'm curious to see what Armstrong is going to do in the weeks and months to come. It may be that, Coinbase and Armstrong are the ones who sort of really agitate and step up into the sort of persona vacuum that crypto lacks right now. And be the ones agitating for sensible legislation. He's really been doing quite a bit. He got on CNBC. He went to Washington a while ago. He also Coinbase released this thing called the crypto 462 or 492 or something. It's basically just the number of representatives in Congress. And if you put your zip code in there, it will show you who your congressman is and what the congressman may or may not have said about crypto already. So
Okay, that's interesting.
yeah, so you know who's pro Bitcoin or crypto in your constituents in your sort of jurisdiction, and even the contact information of that congressman. So you can actually write to his or her office and tell them that you're concerned about crypto legislation, blah blah blah. So he's starting a grassroots campaign. I'm really hoping it's not just window dressing and it's something that he takes seriously. God knows we really need some advocacy and some sort of lobbying in Washington for the crypto industry, especially since SBF is basically going to go to jail now, hopefully for the rest of his life.
Yeah, we'll see. I was gonna say that's a good segue. I kind of wanted your take on this because we always talk about like macro and where stuff could be in 3, 6, 9 months, etc. And I think we kind of hit on it earlier, like just the from 2013 to now. I guess like 2013, the bull market after Mt. Gox blew up, it was kind of okay. We need to have other exchanges and just entities in the space. We don't have the single chokehold, and that's when the Coinbases, Krakens, I guess BitInstant was still there, but we got expansion of that. And then 2017, it was the big ICO shit phase. It was, oh, buy this thing, we'll make a flying car coming out of volcano, blah blah blah. And then all that blew up. And then going to this bull market, we actually had, for better or worse, there were still some issues with them, but we actually had decentralized exchanges. There was layer 2s and 3s like actually working, whether the valuation and the price were on par. That's a whole separate thing. But my point is we've done kind of step ups each bear market, like whatever shits the bed, for lack of a better word, it becomes at least somewhat tangible, or it band-aids itself up going to the next bull market. So to your point, because I know we've talked about this the last couple months or so at the meetups. Do you think we need to get like some Mount Rushmore faces in DC to kind of get the next, like, how do I word this? If we don't get proper representation in DC, do you think we're going to have a shot at really hitting our full potential at the next bull market, whether it's 24, 25, 26? And do you think if we don't get that representation, that can how do I word this? If we don't get the proper representation, let's just call it between the next bull market, which is going to be like end of 24, start of 25, possibly. Do you think the SEC, like we said, we're after the FTXs, the Three Arrows, et cetera, all this stuff blowing up? Do you think the nail is so far stuck out that the SEC is just going to hammer us to death if we don't get that representation? Because I know some people have been talking about that. Like we said, everything's quiet right now. We're in full bear market, ghost town, all the white noise is gone. So do you think, let's just call in the next 12 months, if we don't get some faces in DC, do you think we're just going to get hammered to death and this could stifle us into the next bull market, or it's just too hard to tell?
I think it's too hard to tell. I think there's more to it than just having representation in Washington. The other thing, like we talked about in the last podcast, is the Ripple case was going to be decided, I think, in the next few months. I think by summertime, we'll have a better sense of where that's headed. And I think if Ripple wins, we talked about this before, the legal argument about why they're not a security, if that's what the judge decides, is going to have, it's basically going to be the standard by which these other crypto companies are judged. Right. So if, for example, the judge says, well, listen, the SEC had like 9 years to call it a security, and they waited all these 9 years. Well, go fuck themselves. There's a statute of limitations on these things, so maybe it's a statute of limitation argument. Or if they say, well, no, it's sufficiently decentralized, and that the judge goes on to actually create some definitions of what it means to be decentralized, and maybe that by that criteria, cryptocurrencies are no longer classified as securities, and everyone can say, okay, if we are decentralized to this extent, then we're not a security according to this judgment. So then the industry will move forward to create sufficient decentralization. I'm making all this up. I have no idea if that's how it's going to play out, but I think one of the things that's being under discussed right now is the significant implications of the Ripple case, which I think is, maybe by summertime is going to be decided, and then the exact legal argument by which that's decided is going to have either dramatically negative or positive effects. If it's negative effects, if they say, well, yeah, the SEC is right, it's definitely security, then the SEC suddenly has a ton of power to say, well, there you go. We were upheld. We didn't lose the case. If we're calling something a security, you can't push back against us, because if you do, we're just going to win the case. It's like we did this one. Ripple spent something like $100 million in legal fees. So the SEC were like, come back at us, like, if you want to spend all this money, we're just going to win again anyway. And then they're going to have carte blanche to like decide, like, oh, this is security and that's a security and that's a security. So it's going to have a tremendous influence. So some of these issues may just be sorted out through the Ripple case. But just besides the Ripple thing, we talked about, if Hong Kong opens up for business in the summer, and Dubai also steps it up, and then you hear about the UK also opening it up for business, and then say, for example, Coinbase says, okay, we're leaving. Like we want to be an American company, but if this is how it's going to work, we're just going to like move abroad, right? Because this is no way to act. And if you start seeing that kind of talk as well, that might move the regulator's hand to come up with some sort of regulation that allows crypto to survive. So I think it's not just about like, do we have enough like politicians on our side in Washington. I think we have like a fair bit. It's not as if there aren't politicians out there that are critical of Gary Gensler. They're like, this guy strikes me as a politician who's pretending to be a regulator, right? Because he's probably vying for the Treasury job in a couple of years, right? When the elections happen, and if Biden is reelected, then Gary is probably going to want to like get a promotion and do something else. That's probably why he's cozying up to Elizabeth Warren, right? Because she's also on the Financial Services Committee on the Senate, right? Who's probably going to be one of the folks that that votes on the next Treasury Secretary. So I think all of these things are in play. I think there's a lot of politics in play. I think there's too many moving targets. But I also want to emphasize though that of all of the regulatory actions that have been proposed, and all of the crackdowns that we hear about, and all of the hand wringing and like pearl clutching that the media comes up with, and even the Twitterverse comes up with. So not just the mainstream media, it's also the Twitterverse. There's really not been any sort of fundamental like threat. Like, I will go as far as to say that Bitcoin is perfectly safe from any kind of regulatory scrutiny, because Gary himself, right? You could say, Gary is like probably the most hawkish person. But even Uncle Gary said everything but Bitcoin is a security. So, all right, so we know Bitcoin is not a security, so we got at least that, right? And that's most of the market, right? Now, whether or not you care if Ethereum is a security or Cardano is a security or XRP, whatever, even if those are deemed securities, at least Bitcoin isn't, right? So if you have any like, regulatory concerns, well, you don't have to have them really with Bitcoin then, right? So at least Bitcoin is safe, right? So the safest asset right now from just a regulatory perspective is Bitcoin. So we don't even need a representation, because that battle is already won, right? The Bitcoin is not a security. They've already sorted that out. So if that's the case, Gary, by saying that, also is relinquishing control of the asset class, right? Because if it's not a security, then it cannot be under the jurisdiction of the Securities Exchange Commission, right? Which is what they do. So in that case, I'm bullish. I look at all of this sort of FUD that's coming along, and one of the things we didn't talk about is, Paxos, which is the issuer of the Binance stablecoin, are also under investigation. I don't know if you caught that story recently. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I saw some excerpts on Twitter. It was same thing, heads or tails. Some people were saying Binance is self-imploding in 30 days. Same thing, other people were like, this is FUD, 30 days, no one's going to be sneezing about it, etc. So, well,
so the FUD, that is truly, if there's any FUD going around, that's like huge FUD, right? The Paxos Binance USD thing. And I'll tell you why. So the Binance USD coin is issued not by Binance at all. It is actually issued by Paxos. And Paxos is an American company based in New York, regulated by the New York regulators, right? That full stop. It has nothing to do with Binance at all. So they have a branding arrangement with Binance to say, hey, can we slap the word Binance on there because you're a big exchange and everything? And Binance like, sure, we can slap our name on there, and we'll use the token and everything. But you guys are the ones responsible for producing the stable coin and for like custodying all of this. You do all of those things. We have nothing to do with the money. But of course, since people say, well, Binance USD is, now banned, therefore Binance is in trouble. But that's just not true at all. It has nothing at all to do with Binance whatsoever, right? So it's one of those other examples, just like Silvergate and like, some of the other things like Tether, like making those, banking shell companies. When you really like double click and you read the article and you're like, okay, what's the actual problem? Is there an existential threat to Binance because BUSD is being banned? And you look at the actual details. No, there's no threat at all because it has nothing to do with Binance except for just they stuck the name Binance on there so they could just sort of get some like mileage out of the stablecoin, right? And then Binance also said, all right, if you're minting it, then we'll use it and we'll just call it BUSD. But just so we're clear, we don't have anything to do with minting it at all, right? So it's yet another one of those things where the general point that I was making is that when you look at the Silvergate thing, when you look at the Paxos thing, when you hear about, well, Binance did some questionable things, in 2021, there was another thing they did as well where perhaps they're wrapped USDC. So Binance has a whole bunch of USDC, and what they do is they wrap it in their BNB chain, right? Just like you wrap, Ethereum. You can wrap Bitcoin on Ethereum.
Bitcoin on Ethereum, yeah.
You can actually wrap USDC on the BNB chain, and then you turn it into a new thing called, a USDC, right? And so the big scandal that they also started, putting forward is that about a year ago, not all of the BUSD was actually matching with the USDC that they got. So they take USDC, wrap it, and then they would just start trading BUSDC, right? And the contention of the article was that, well, it seems like that was not one-to-one backed. And that was I almost call it a hit piece by Forbes that came out just about a week ago. And by CZ actually pushed back as like, this is horseshit. You're looking at the blockchain and you're making all these conclusions that it wasn't fully backed. This is not true at all. So the truth really lies in like who's reading the blockchain data properly. And Binance came up with a huge, long rebuttals like let's explain how wallets work and how our hot wallet works and cold wallet works, and all of this thing is complete FUD. But if you look at the headline, you're saying that Binance was did not back a stable coin, and you look at the headline, well, BUSD is banned, and all of that. If you put all this soup together, you end up with this message that Binance is going under. But if you actually double click on the details, I'm like, hold on a second, this BUSD has nothing to do with Binance. And the other thing they're being accused of happened a year ago, and it has also nothing to do with the actual Binance token or anything at all like that. You're like, okay, it almost seems like there's some sort of coordinated, either it's a coordinated FUD campaign, against like the whole crypto industry. I'm not a conspiratorial person, so I don't actually believe that's the case. I actually think what's happening is that we're in peak bear. And editors of news magazines and
they're dying for stories.
Yeah, they're like, hey, come up with some other shit that we can sling at the crypto market because that's what's selling right now, right? Yeah. And then these things just sort of compound on each other. Like, oh, okay, Forbes came out with some stuff about crypto. We need to come up with some stuff about crypto, and it's not going to be a positive story. Like, here we go, no. Bitcoin saved a baby today. Let's tell you all about it. It's gonna have to be some hit piece. So this is what we're talking about in the very beginning of this episode is this is where people tune out because they're not paying attention. But if you actually read underneath the headlines, you're like, okay, none of this is like really that alarming, and it really should cast your mind back to like the peak COVID days where like it was a zombie apocalypse and we were all gonna die and we had to like save your kids and your wife and you had to buy toilet paper because the civilization was collapsing and none of that turned out to be true at all. And it turned out that the media just loved the story and they were just milking it for as much ratings as they could milk it for. And I think a little bit of that, I'm not saying that, there's like some cabal of a conspiracy against crypto. I'm just saying this is how the media works. It becomes an echo chamber. If, a corporation one comes out with a hit piece or a bad story about crypto, well, we got to come up with one too, and some other one. And then you boil all that down to headlines, and the headlines sound scary, but you actually have to read what's underneath the headlines and understand what the story is, and you realize, okay, it's actually not as bad as people are making it out. So yeah, peak bear is when people just stop paying attention and they just assume everything's going to collapse and Bitcoin has died yet again. And whatever, 6 months from now, a year from now, people are going to look back and like, oh fuck, we got duped again by the negative stories.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I guess a good segue to kind of end on, like I said, I went out with a friend last night and hadn't seen her in a while, and same thing. You just kind of, I don't know, usually about 30 minutes into the conversation, she'd be like, all right, give me your 5-minute crypto. So I kind of gave her up to date on everything. And same thing, like I told you when I was back home, when I was with some buddies, and they kind of said the same thing, like, oh, you're still pretty optimistic. And it's what you just said. I told them, it's, it's like, what's the old saying is like, here's that's the news, but here's the rest of the story, and it's like, for example, I think we were talking about this in the last episode. If you go on the news right now, apparently the U.S. infrastructure is falling apart left and right. You hear all these train derailments, and like I told you, I'm like 2 IQ clicks north of a monkey, right? And my little Google search I did, every year in America there's anywhere between 2,000 to 2,500 for lack of a better word, just train accidents or train derailments. So you do the math on that, that's like 5 of them a day. I'm not saying that's good, but if you look at the news right now, you see like 2 a day. It's like, well, statistically on average that's up to par. Not saying I want trains derailing with oil and stuff, but same thing too. She was just asking me about some stuff. She's like, oh, I heard this, that, and a third, and stuff's blowing up. And I told her about like the hash rate and I'm blanking right now, but Ethereum has that new update coming out soon. And I was basically, she's like, what is this? And I basically told her like, this is the ABC stuff. This is the stuff that really matters. And I was explaining to her like the whole hash rate and basically even in that 5 little minute thing, she's like, oh, well, that's good. I guess things are still going well. And she even said what you just said. She's like, well, I guess if I get a little bit of money, it seems like a good time to buy. I'm like, yes, this is because everything's quiet right now. Everything's chill. And I even
did you tell her this is not financial advice? That's what you're required to do.
Oh God, yeah, no. Well, unfortunately, like I joke with people too. It's like if they ask, like same thing when we had like peak bull, man, people are coming to me, and I'm like, if you come to me for any advice, especially financial advice, like you deserve to be poor. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, it's just like it's true. Like even Lynn Alden, man, like I would blindly listen to her, and she even says it, like, don't listen to me, I'm an idiot. And she's like one of the top 10 people in finance in my opinion right now. But I guess like to summarize on everything you just said too, it's like just talking to my friend last night, it's like it's the darkest for the dawn, and it's like we talked about, it's like I honestly, and I think you're in the same boat, I like the bear markets way more than the bull markets because all the white noise is gone, and I assume you're the same. When we get pull like peak bull, from a financial standpoint, it's good. Every day you go on your cold storage or you just do math in your head, you're like, oh, I'm up X% today. But I assume you're the same. I also get anxiety because I know we're going towards a cliff, and then a lot of new people are going to get hurt, and then same thing, it's we're going to have all this shit unfolding like we just did the last 12 months with the FTX of the world and everything. But I mean, yeah, like I said last night, unfortunately I couldn't make it, but just chatting with you, we had the same OGs coming through and everything's still clicking. So it's like I said, I still think, I don't, like, again, I brought up the whole Tether Binance thing because I was in the Twitter realms. Maybe it's just because I'm analyzing past too much, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. I still think within the next 12 months, we have one more crypto thing to unfold. What that's going to be, I don't know. I agree with you. We are pretty bear. I just still think just because of the macro environment too, I just still think we have like one more level of just like hell to descend into, for lack of a better word. But you said it perfectly. There's just so much FUD going on with the news media. They have nothing to talk about in 9 months. Unfortunately, we're going to be, everyone's a political expert again with the presidencies, throwing their hats in the ring. So I think we still have another 6 months of just licking our wounds, and then everyone's going to be going on to, Biden, Trump, DeSantis, tomfoolery. But no, it's like you said, I think everyone's just beating up on us right now because there's nothing else to talk and click about. So it's just kind of, same shit, different day.
Well, let me ask you, you were the one who brought this up. The elections are unfortunately they're probably going to start, gearing up in full swing. There's going to be election talk probably starting this summer. But my question for you is, do you have a sense of whether or not during this election cycle, cryptocurrency or Bitcoin in particular is going to be election talking point for either party?
That's a tough one. Like, it's a tough one. It's weird because sometimes I think it already is. Like, I don't know if you follow AOC and Elizabeth Warren on Twitter, just their accounts. Like, this is some stuff like Warren has tweeted. I'm like, that's just factually wrong. And then B, I think we talked about this in one of our first episodes. One thing that does perplex me, like you said, she's on the Senate Finance Committee. What she taught at Harvard, I believe, too, right? She was
Yeah,
the
think
finance
so.
professor.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like she is very steeped in educating these markets, and it's like again, there's tons of problems with Bitcoin. Like we've talked about this. There's like we could do a whole book on it, but compared to legacy financial system, it works a lot better than what's been going on with people. But she just bashes on Bitcoin, and like we talked about this, like if you wanted like to make a poster child just to help like underprivileged and just the working class, like Bitcoin would be your thumping point, but she beats it down. And that's just her alone. I do feel like, I guess the reason I bring that up, just like on a apples to oranges thing, I feel like the left or the Democrats, whatever you want to call it, they're more against Bitcoin crypto right now. Some of it is valid. Some of it I think is, there's a lot of powers that be in Washington. Unfortunately, I think, lobbyists, banks, et cetera, behind them. And on the flip side, I think maybe you could say the conservative Republicans are, they're more open market, fix itself. They're a little bit more pro. With that said, unfortunately, like, there's 350 million idiots in this country. And like we said, in the next 9 months, the best three we have is Sleepy Joe, Orange Man, and DeSantis. So it like, could it become a talking point? Possibly, but I assume you're like most Americans. You saw the Biden Trump debates over COVID. I think there's just so much animosity right now going into that. I think they're just gonna be talking shit on each other. I think they're gonna be bringing up COVID again. They're gonna be talking about China, supply chains, infrastructure, debt, interest rates, etc. So I think there's just how do I word this? The next presidency race is going to be another shit throwing match. So I think there's a lot of bigger piles of dung to throw than crypto. Could crypto maybe become a little barking point here and there? But to my point, there's just so much shit that's happened in the last 24 months. If I was Trump and I was going to talk shit again, I'm like you, not a Trump fan, but if I was Trump and I was going to talk shit on Sleepy Joe, crypto is like on the next second page of shit to start throwing at them. So
Yeah.
so it's if it happens, great, because like all publicity is good publicity, but I just think unfortunately the presidency race isn't talking about real issues or actually relevancy to the average American. It's just like, what's the most gossip, dirty thing I can throw at my opponent just to get, like we said, some clicks for 30 days. So
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if come the first presidential debate it even gets a 30-second airpiece.
Yeah, no, it probably won't. I agree with you. I don't think it'll get to the level of the presidential sort of like conversation. Um, but there's also going to be a lot of House races, and there's going to be a lot of Senate races as
Okay, yeah,
well.
sure. Forgot about that. Yeah, 2 years.
and,
Yeah.
and there's going to be some, more to the point really is sort of how the debate gets structured, right? It's not just going to be about, we want innovation in America, so we should allow for cryptocurrency. I kind of wonder if the conversations is going to center around government control of money. Oh, listen, the government has devalued the US dollar by, 98% over the last 120 years. And,
Yeah.
Obviously under Biden, we've had, pretty bad inflation. So it's been devalued even more than that. And that process just keeps going on. And so, I wonder if, one of the side effects of this inflation that we've been seeing for the last 2 years is people start thinking more about things like monetary policy, right? Because over the last three elections, we really didn't have any, not three, in fact, maybe 4 or 5, presidential
Yeah.
elections. We never really had a conversation about like our monetary policy or inflation in general. And in the 70s and 80s, when we had really bad inflation the last time, there was no such thing as a decentralized alternative monetary network like Bitcoin, but there is now. And so when these conversations happen about, well, what should we do to tackle the national debt, because that's going up. What should we do about inflation, because it stung us in the ass, and who knows, like inflation might still be here next year, right? It might still be as bad as it is.
I think it's very likely. It's Peter Schiff talks about, there's a reason they call it genie in a bottle. It's like it comes out easy. It's just like pizza. It goes down easy, really hard to get off the waist. So I'd be I would probably sell all my crypto if 12 months from now inflation was not on CNN, Fox every morning again.
One of the things that has definitely changed in our political and cultural landscape in the last 5 or 6 years, probably just sort of the whole post-Trump phenomena, is a increasing distrust of centralized control. So I think that was one of the reasons why Trump got elected, back in 2016, is like people were just so fed up of the federal government that they just wanted an outsider to come in and take a blowtorch to the whole thing and burn, most of it down.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure to what extent he really did that or accomplished much, but then COVID happened, and then we had, the whole lockdown phenomena, and then we had the whole, like, well, you have to take vaccines if you want to work here, you have to wear a mask if you want to enter this building, and if you say this, that, or the other thing, we're going to ban you or cancel you on YouTube or whatever it is. So a lot of people finally sort of saw firsthand that when the government really wants to assert control over you, they have all of these tools, including freezing your bank account if they want to. So the Canadian truckers, for example, were protesting mandatory vaccines about a year and a half ago, and they sort of clogged up, a whole large, I forget which city it was, but it turned into a whole global movement.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the government did to sort of just stop and break the movement was they froze their bank accounts. I don't know if you know, they just said, well, you now you don't have money. And they actually said in post-mortems, like, that was very effective. Like when we said, we're just going to freeze your bank accounts, that actually broke the back of the protests. So, it's that, it's the COVID mandates, it's this mandate, and it's like, well, we're going to just send money to Ukraine, and then inflation happens, and then there's no trust in mainstream media. So what I was getting at is that in that milieu of just total distrust in institutional systems that we've taken for granted for like decades, when all of that trust is corroding away, is there some place in the political conversation for talking about a decentralized, non-sovereign, uncorrelated monetary network like Bitcoin, which the government cannot control really? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just saying that at least, looking forward, I see that there's possibility of Bitcoin entering the debate in some capacity. It doesn't have to be on the presidential debate level or even the senatorial races or anything. Just be some part of the national conversation as people start thinking again, because one of the things that happens in presidential election cycles is people start thinking again, okay, like, what do we want out of the next president, right? Like, well, okay, where do you stand on XYZ? So that at least everyone's checked out right now. No one actually gives a shit about our politics, but they will again once those, election cycles start gearing up in full swing and we start seeing it all over the place. People are going to start thinking about these things, and I'm wondering if the time is ripe for a conversation, that's going to be held, much more national now about Bitcoin. And that's sort of the gist of what I was getting at is, and I don't know the answer to that. But I do think the time is right. If there was any time, for getting Bitcoin into the national conversation about what do we want in terms of control over monetary policy, this is certainly one of those times where it could very gracefully enter the public discourse and fit right in to the moment of the times. And maybe that'll happen, I hope it does. It's long overdue conversation, long overdue.
Yeah, I guess like one thing, I guess the segue on that might be like a good thing to end on too. I know he's we were talking about, is like what's flooding crypto, what's news, what's the story, etc. Buy the news, sell the hype, etc. Like, is Brian Armstrong good or bad? Peter Schiff, obviously, I bring him up a lot. He's very polarizing in the crypto space and legacy finance, but I think he hits on a lot of things. And I don't know if you're the same. It perplexes me how he's not into Bitcoin, because like everything he argues for with gold is 100% true. And you could say that with Bitcoin, and you could say maybe he's invested where the hell 30 years of his personal and professional finance career into something. This new horse comes along, and not that Bitcoin's eating gold's lunch money, but you can make an argument that like maybe in 20 or 30 years it breaks that $10 trillion market cap. Some gold. I mean, Lawrence Lepper was a gold bug. He's taken some of his fiduciary allocation and moved it over to Bitcoin just because that's his freaking job. But one thing he talks about especially in his last I don't know if you follow his YouTube channel, the last 6 7 episodes he's been harping on this. Unfortunately, like you said, at least probably since Clinton or even George Bush Sr., we haven't really had like a real president talking about like balancing a budget. I think it's been since Lyndon Johnson we've actually balanced the budget. I could be wrong about that, but basically people just do what's going to get them voted, and they're like, all right, I'm basically wrapping this gold or this turd in gold, and I'm going to hand off to the next president, wash my hands clean. And Schiff talks about that. The whether it's a congressperson or a president that actually tries to fix the economy, they're going to be in 20 years later be viewed as one of the worst presidents because I've said this before. It's a little cheap analogy, but if you go to a good personal trainer, what they're going to say is the whole beer and pizza, you're done with that shit for 6 months. And no one wants to hear that. They want their trainer to tell them, oh, you can have soda and cake all day. So I guess my question is, as Schiff is talk about, I do agree with you. There is maybe underlying threads, and there's enough tension, for lack of a better word, to be like, hey, there's been all just this. Uh, well, I mean, we've seen it. We just ended a 12-year bull market, 0% interest rates. We just printed $7 trillion. And like I told you a year ago when I was telling my buddies about inflation, they're like, whatever, Alex Jones. And now they're like, holy shit, eggs are like $18 a pop. But Schiff talks about this, even though a lot of people or the average American is starting to be aware of this and like, oh, this fun money shit we've been playing for 20 years is kind of coming to a head. Do you think there's a politician that actually has the balls to be like, hey, we're going to fix this? And with that, I think I've said this before. COVID was weird because I feel like a lot of liberal talking points became conservative talking points and vice versa. So like the parties kind of flipped. But on top of that, too, I think COVID showed on both sides of the political spectrum, people would rather be, controlled than free. And people, it doesn't matter if they're a Trumper or a Biden head, they kind of want, like, whether it's big pharma, the bank, the government to tell them what to do. Do you think there is still, like, I agree with you. I think there's a tension where people are realizing it, but do you think there's enough of the population that's like, all right, we're sick of this, we're actually going to get an adult in the room? Or do you think we're still like 10 years away from where, because my point is, like, we had Bush, went all the way to Obama, people got sick of Obama, went all the way to Trump, now we have Biden. So it's kind of been a seesaw too. So I do agree with you, there's underlying tension, but do you still think there's enough of the population that's like, all right, now it's time to get some adults in the room? Or it's just, only time will tell?
I hope so. I think one of the things that it's going to be very interesting to see is to what extent alternative media sources that have cropped up in the last and become really big, really big in the post-Trump era, right? So I'm thinking about like the likes of Joe Rogan. I don't know if you also follow
Lex.
Russell.
Lex is a good one.
I mean, yeah, but Lex is not political.
Not true.
What's his name? Russell Brand.
Russell Brand, yeah.
Yeah. So these guys, when they put out an episode, they get more views than like an entire
CNN, Fox.
nightly news of Fox or CNBC or CNN, right? And they've been like, and they pump out content a lot. Their people trust them like a lot, right? So they're like, oh, this is definitely true. And to what extent are they going to be able to swing the political conversation come the next election cycle, right? Because they're not going to be like sit down for this, right? And it's not just Russell Brand, but there's also the whole like The Wire, which is Ben Shapiro and all of the people, and Jordan Peterson is part of The Wire too. They're going to have things to say once the political election cycle really gets into swing. And those voices have never been more powerful than they are now. They're only getting more powerful. And the mainstream media has never been less powerful, and they're only going to get even less powerful as time goes. So it's going to be very instructive to see to what extent these people have sway over the political conversation going forward, right? Because, I mean, even the likes of Elon Musk, right? He can, you think he's going to stay quiet in the next election cycle?
Oh, hell no. Hell no.
He's going to have things to say, right? He could move the entire, media narrative
Needle,
with a tweet, right? So that is like a big unknown in the next election cycle that I'm really excited to, watch out for. I think Trump is the first person who demonstrated that social media can actually drive narratives throughout the world, right? And I think a lot of people learned that lesson. Elon Musk definitely internalized that lesson, and he's sort of taken over the mantle. But all of these other alternative news, media sources as well they're pretty much licking their chops. They're like, okay, 2024 is going to be the time where we really figure out like how big are we now? What can we actually accomplish and do? And my impression is, and I might be biased because I listen to all these guys all the time, and I don't listen to any mainstream media at all. Like, I mean, I almost like it's almost, I pride myself in saying that it has been probably more than 2 years that I have ever, like, I have heard any CNN anchor's voice in my ears. Like, if there's a YouTube video that shows some CNN clip, I actually do not watch it. Like in fact, I may have muted or blocked CNN on my YouTube feed or something because I never see them anymore. The same for Fox. No, the same for Fox, MSNBC. The only news art channel I watch is MSNBC, and that's only CNBC, the news network. Sorry, the business network, and that too is for amusement reasons, not because I believe that they know anything they're talking about.
They got a tap, yeah.
But in terms of like mainstream news, I don't watch any of them at all. Right, I read my news, and I get it from various sources. I get it from international sources, and not American sources at all. And I can't imagine that I'm the only one who's doing this. I think a lot of people are in the same boat that I'm in. I don't think like I'm doing anything that's very special or different. And to what extent that influences the debate about monetary networks and like this is what we want from our next government, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years. So yeah, man, I'm thinking on that optimistic note, as always. We should wrap it up for today. Did you have any parting thoughts, or we need to wrap up here?
No, I mean, you hit it on the head, man. I think we always say like the biggest thing is, definitely try to keep your ear on the ground. But like you said, this thing we call the truth, whether it's in finance or it's in politics or science, pick your vertical. It's a moving thing, and even experts, like we've talked about, this finance experts, you ask them what inflation the dollar is, you're gonna get 10 different answers, and it's like, who's wrong? None of them. So it's like you want to keep your ear on the ground with this stuff. But at the end of the day, we were talking about politics. A lot of people talk about local voting and stuff. It's just what you do on a day in, day out. Is gonna affect you the most. Doesn't matter representative, whether it's Trump, Biden, round two, if the dog's driving. So it's like, keep working on yourself, keep your money coming in, whether it's Bitcoin, land, gold, commodity mining stocks. Just like do your homework on stuff, buy things. And like we said, unfortunately, in the next 12 months, a lot of the drums are going to get beaten again. So it's like we said, the bear market's kind of still kicking everyone's ass right now, but it's quiet and I'm enjoying it. And same thing, man. It's like the next 12, 24 months, stuff's going to be crazy, left, right, sideways. It's just, it's like we got the crypto crew. Everyone helps keep each other sane. But to anyone listening, it's like what you do on a day in, day out basis is going to affect you the most. And like you said, you got to watch what you intake from the social medias of the world and then the legacy media, because, it's, if you didn't talk to normal people and didn't actually go out in the real world, like we said, over COVID, you would have thought the sky's fallen. So it's nothing's going to change in the next 24 months. You just got to, keep your head level and keep shit moving, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. All right, buddy. Nice talk. We'll do it again next week.
No, appreciate it, man. Always a pleasure.
All right, dude.